Hello world! Curses of madness be upon you all for live fighters. I am Euclidean Vision, the emotional support, back in the saddle and spreading my wings. Apex Legends has been giving me everything that I really wanted out of Overwatch recently, so today I'm just going to full on jump ship and dive right into one particular broken ghost, with everyone's my favourite, Pathfinder's favourite simulacrum, the ever mysterious ice cream addict and amnesiac pilot, Ash. And so, given her situation as it stands in High Five and Makeup, the latest comic chapter, Ash has been fixed up, she's shacked up with Pathfinder, but she also doesn't seem to know much about who she actually is. This has supposedly happened before, as when Vinson Dynamics rebuilt her following the events of Titanfall 2, she was said to be seeking out the IMC's Remnant fleet for the secrets of her past. So while her memory loss could be attributed to the at least twice that she's been destroyed as a simulacrum, there is the possibility that she suffered memory loss from the regeneration procedure as a human pilot, or that something in her coding prohibits her from accessing certain memories. There could be a bunch of reasons. There's also the possibility that her head is actually from an alternate dimension, so she's in fact two Ashes, or this entire Ash originally came from the Shadowfall dimension itself, but that's a whole can of worms I'll address on its own at the end. Assume that I'm not really covering that unless I bring it up. And so because of that ridiculous factor especially, this video is just here to theorise and speculate on certain pieces of evidence that could link other characters back to our original Ash in some form. And so, with that said, we then have to start with the obvious one, just get him out of the way, Kuben Blisk. Ash served under Blisk in the mercenary group the Apex Predators, at least when they were working for the Ares division on Typhon, and they seemingly parted ways when she was rebuilt by Vinson Dynamics following the Battle of Titan. While Blisk seems very familiar with his pilot's personalities in Titanfall 2, he speaks to Ash on the most sort of personal and most expansive level of any of his crew that we get to see, and she gets to show far more of her character through her interactions with Blisk and Jack Cooper than any of the other pilots really get to. However, whether Blisk actually cares about Ash or not at this point is pretty uncertain. Like, he might be pretty disappointed that she failed him back on Typhon, but there's no obvious pressing matter that shows that he's after her particularly. The only thing I can think of is that he wants to reform the Apex Predators, but that's really up in the air at this point. So that's all we really know when it comes to Blisk. Him and Ash have history, there's not really much going on at present. So, let's drop shock and rock onto our next possible connection with Bangalore. And this one kind of surprised me when I learned about it from this season's Battle Pass. At level 56, you unlock a short story excerpt called The Referral, which shows that Blisk and Bangalore actually are able to sort of meet up and speak on a relatively personal level. Like, she takes him out for drinks, she recommends Ramia to the games, he's pretty happy to take her recommendation. Seems there's at least like a personal connection there that might have existed, potentially even well before the games, like they could have met through the IMC. This would of course rely on the timeline between sort of Bangalore's ship getting attacked when the battle on Typhon was, for them to have actually met, but I imagine even if they didn't, Bangalore probably would have at least heard of the notorious Apex Predators just from being within the IMC. And then you can sort of take that logic and apply it to someone like Mirage, as his mother and brothers were involved in the militia side of the Frontier War to various extents. They may have also at least heard of or known of their most infamous opponents in the Apex Predators. Neither character addressed this in The Broken Ghost, so it's not really that likely. However, given the proceedings of Season 6 and how Rampart has been introduced to things, there's very strong potential that maybe she has been told about who Ash is, either from her connections with Blisk, or through any of these other connections. But to jump back to the IMC for now, we're going to go and look at Wraith, who as we know worked with the Ares division, as we've already mentioned them, as a research science pilot in assumedly both the main and IMC dimension. That only becomes important because it's Wraith, right? Her abilities, her multidimensional abilities, come from expanding on the phase shift tech that's seen in Titanfall, with Project Wraith supposedly aiming to recreate the readings from the device recovered in the Typhon explosion. So, how does Ash tie into any of that? While the phase shift tech is unlikely anything to do with Ash herself, Her Ronin Titan uses this technology, and supposedly around the time of Titanfall 2, only Simulacra and Titans were able to use phase shift in the first place. Which could quite easily lead to when this new Project Wraith sort of takes up after the Battle of Titan, Vinson Dynamics could quite happily loan out one of their most respected Simulacra in Ash to another IMC-affiliated body in the Ares division. It's only a possibility, but being pawned off to a research lab could even be the wee bit of betrayal before breakfast that is stuck in Ash's mind, with the interdimensional experiments that she was then subject to, potentially linking back to the multiple gates that she has codes for. Again, that's all supposition, but it makes a lot of sense if Project Wraith were able to find volunteers, as Voidwalker's audio log suggests they'll have to try and find some. Your first shot at volunteers for technology that can only be used with Simulacra and Titans is going to be Simulacra, right? That's just a logical first step. If humans couldn't use it in the first place, don't test the next thing on humans. And having brought up Voidwalker's audio log, as she mentions they have to find volunteers before she'd have to offer herself, when she travels to the IMC dimension and she meets our Wraith tells her that
no one ever makes it out.
Which suggests that Wraith wasn't the only test subject, potentially in any dimension that this occurred. But again, that's a bit of a shot in the dark. It's all supposition, like Ash could have been part of Project Wraith. She just could have. There's nothing to say that she was. Let's have a look at another character who might be able to shed some light on the same situation. And yes, I'm on about Wattson. Quickly, just some voice lines between her and Wraith that I'm going to explore now.
Wraith, when I was a girl, I saw a ghost here. Nobody believes me so. The ghost is real. She attacked me, down in that lab.
I told you, there's no such thing as... Wait. We should talk more about this later.
I swear, I saw the apparition. She had dead eyes and appeared out of nowhere.
I promise you, Natalie, you didn't see it. Hold up. We should discuss this later.
Look, Wraith, it's where I saw my ghost. So glad you believe me now.
Subtle. Let's keep it between us for now. We'll talk about it later.
Wraith, we can go say hi to my ghost, now that you believe me.
Now that we know the truth, let's keep it to ourselves.
So, while this ghost is most likely to either be Wraith or Voidwalker, one of their experiments, depending on how old Wattson was as a girl, and how long the project ran for in either dimension, there's again at least the possibility that Ash was an earlier volunteer for Project Wraith, or perhaps was the final failure that led Renee to offer herself as a test subject. And if she remembers something happening to Ash and not herself here, then that would actually tie these interactions into the central plotline going through seasons 5 and 6, like Ash being rebuilt, rather than just being sort of like a loose plot thread that dangles off into Wraith's distant future. Like, it could actually be way more important now than it appears. But again, supposition and timeline-y stuff gets a bit messy, so looking back more at the sort of physical evidence of what's said again, Wattson describes the ghost's eyes as dead, which if she thinks that the ghost is Wraith, or they determine that the ghost is Wraith, it's kind of a mean way to refer to Wraith's eyes, right? Like, especially for Wattson. It's hard to mistake those piercing white eyes. So it's unlikely that she said this thinking that it was Wraith, or that they've come to the conclusion that it was Wraith. So then it makes you think, like, whose eyes could she be on about? And, I mean, who else's eyes would be described as dead? Yes, right? Ash's eyes definitely fit the description of dead, better than probably most any character that we know of. And with that in mind, if it were Ash, that makes much more sense to be keeping a secret. Because there's no obvious need to keep a time that Wraith phased into our dimension several years ago a secret. Like, we know that she's a multi-dimensional being from another dimension. Like, there's no need to keep that between them. Which, again, makes me think that it's not Wraith that Wattson saw at all. Which then makes me think that that could then also tie into Wattson knowing that Ash's skull belonged to a she, along with knowing how all the parts worked. And her given reasoning, like, she's coy, it's obviously a girl, that would have then been a lie, especially as Wraith had asked her to keep the ghost thing between them, right? This could then also be the real reason that Wraith wanted them to finish making the skull, not to see what it did, but because she knows what it is, and she wants to gain a potential link to her past that she's just remembered. But then the pair of them lying could also have contributed to how terrible Wattson feels at the end of the story about betrayal. It's not just that she was betrayed, she betrayed everyone else as well, right? There's also the fact that the ghost attacked Wattson, and, you know, that obviously could be one of the Wraiths being like, help me, what's going on? But it sounds way more like the outcome of a failed experiment, rather than just like a mishap or something, if you will. Like, looking at Voidwalker's like mastery of her powers, and how our Wraith sort of latently manifests them, there's no obvious like hazardous cross-world event to speak of. Like, there seems to be nothing in her past that was this one jarring incident, unless that's the incident that cost our Wraith her memories. That's obviously very possible. But then if you do look back to Ash, if anything, lines such as failsafe, failsafe,
who's got the failsafe,
and x equals the temperature of the negative space, not the specimen itself, those two lines indicate clear memories of a failed experiment, who's got the failsafe, and some kind of involvement with high-level theoretical physics. X equals the temperature of the negative space, not the specimen itself. That's leading into some multi-dimensional positioning sort of shit, right? Like, and then the title that they give this entity of a ghost, you know, Wattson calls it her ghost, this apparition, that's also probably particularly key, given that Ash is one of the many clear interpretations of a broken ghost that the broken ghost gave us. Revenant obviously being another one. As obviously she's kind of a ghost in several senses, right? Literally. But she was very clearly also broken, and perhaps even scattered into another dimension, which would make sense for being a failed multidimensional experiment, like, say, a precursor to the successful Project Wraith. And then, that may make you want to consider who Ash might be recalling talking to when she says,
who doesn't like ice cream? Every kid likes ice cream.
there's only one child that we know of involved in this situation, if it were Ash, yeah? So, not only that, this whole idea works as like a fantastic like narrative cover, hiding Ash's involvement underneath sort of clues, oh, we're going to learn something about Wraith. Because the broken ghost idea can obviously suit Wraith quite well herself, which just allows them to hide the true ghost from us. And then if you think about this on like a character level, there's actually so much more to work with here if Wraith remembers something involving Ash in her past. Because if she just remembers, oh, I ghosted into this dimension and met Wattson 10 years ago, so what? It doesn't do anything, it doesn't change anything. If it were her remembering, oh, I as the leader of Project Wraith, I was the person responsible for tearing Ash across dimensions. I did that. That's a huge character development and a dilemma for Wraith and for Ash if she remembers what Wraith did to her. Like, that's so much drama. That's so much more of a storyline going forward. That's why I'm interested in that anyway. So, of course, none of that is certain at all. It's all kind of super messy. But you can hopefully see, like I say, that there's a better storyline there if it were to be Ash. And when you apply the framework of Ash being this ghost, several of the elements, both of like Ash's voice lines and Wraith and Wattson's interactions, you can quite successfully interpret Ash to fit that situation, right? So after all that was way too complicated. I'm going to close out on some nice, concrete, concise connections, commencing with Caustic. And I literally personally just have to read you like 3-4 lines from The Broken Ghost, and you'll understand how Caustic should know who Ash is, and possibly knows her personally. From Chapter 5, I had a short tenure at Vinson Dynamics. I am familiar with the intricacies of simulacrum programming. The source of a unit's internal logic, the emotions, the memories, the personality, is the original human brain tissue built into its cranial frame. But in Revenant, it would appear his original tissue, his source code, is external to the unit. Fascinating. So, I mean, as I mentioned, Ash worked for Vinson Dynamics. Caustic is familiar with the intricacies of simulacrum programming, especially ones that still have their original brain tissue built into their cranial frame. It kind of suggests to me he's familiar with the intricacies of Ash's simulacrum programming. He knows her personally, which is why he's then surprised in learning about Revenant being different, yada yada. But there's one final line that I think just fully puts the nail in the coffin on this one. From The Broken Ghost, Chapter 8. I told Revenant everything because Loba Andrade was digging into our pasts and unearthing skeletons best kept buried. Yeah, I don't think I have to spell that one out, really, do I? Unearthing skeletons, robot skeleton. Yeah, Caustic and Ash are very clearly linked through their past somehow. She evidently knows something about him that he doesn't want anybody else to find out about. And if he weren't so concerned with the progress of science, he might have actually gotten his way and she wouldn't have been repaired at all. So, as we can see yet again, there's no concrete evidence that they're linked, but yet again there's a lot of suggestions hidden in there which bodes pretty well for the future. And then to look at another sort of relatively simple suggestion, there's every possibility that Revenant knows who Ash is, as this image suggests that she may have even been a notable or even publicised Hammond-made simulacrum about 25 years ago. Which then kind of brings us to the final point and the big picture here. Hammond Robotics. What do they want Ash for? Like, there's every potential that she was built by them, as this image suggests. She may have even been a human IMC pilot, so linked to them even before she was a simulacrum. But either way, they evidently want her repaired for some reason. And I think this is the one situation that could hold value, whether she is the original Ash, or Shadowfall Ash, or a mixture of the two. If she is our core original Ash, then they could want her because she's the key to finding Blisk, if he's still sort of off the radar. Or she could be some kind of key to opening up Olympus to the Syndicate. Perhaps Olympus want Ash and she's the Syndicate sort of bargaining chip to move the games up there. Don't know. Or she's the road to Branthium. Whatever Branthium is, even if it's just some sort of abstract concept or something bullshit like that, right? But then you can take the consideration that if she is Shadowfall Ash or a mixture of Ashes, then Hammond would want her repaired so that they could learn how Shadowfall Revenant took down his version of the Syndicate. So again, it's all suggestions, there's no concrete evidence for most any of these really, it's all supposition, but when you take those suppositions and put Ash into the framework, it actually kind of works a lot of the time. A lot of this personally makes a lot of sense and has a lot of interesting things to build into as we go forward. And as by the time this video goes out, Dinner for Four, the next comic chapter, might even have been released. We might see that some of these suggestions are right or not. Like, we've got Mirage and Rampart about to meet Ash, so we might find out if they know who she is at all. But with that, that's all the suggestions that I can see sort of lying around in the lore that could lead us to other characters that have connections back to Ash. So I hope you enjoyed them. I hope that some of them hold water, right? Like, it'd be really fun if some of these do have storylines to lead into as we go forward with the Apex Legends story. But then that's all that I have for today. Thanks for staying with me to this point, guys. Again, I really hope you enjoyed some of these ideas. I'll hopefully be covering the comics as they start coming out now that I'm back to making videos. I do have some other Overwatch stuff that I'll be coming back to. I want to just look at story things now. I can't be bothered talking about balance. It's fucking boring. Thanks again for staying with me. I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Take care of yourselves out there, teammates. And may the glorious light of Best Girl shine within you. Bye-bye.
Do